Today's topic: Children's Literature in Pedagogy of Teaching English, B.Ed Semester 2nd. Children's literature, also known as juvenile literature, which includes stories, books, magazines, and poems. Modern children's literature classified as per genre and as per intended age of reader. So, children's literature is anything that children read or more in any category. Children's literature was traced in 15th century, and in late 19th and early 20th centuries it became known as the golden age of children's literature. The classification of literature is that it classified by genre, which includes picture books, traditional literature, fiction, in which fantasy, realistic fiction, and historical fiction included, non-fiction, in which biography and autobiography, and the poetry. As per each category, children's literature classified as picture books for 0 to 5 years, early reader books children 5 to 7 years, chapter book 7 to 12 years, short chapter books appropriate for children age group 7 to 9 years, and longer chapter books for 9 to 12 years, and young adult fiction appropriate for the children age group 12 to 18 years. Now we come to the history of children's literature. It was started with the classical world and in the roots of the ancient Greek and Rome. The literature in the classical world began with the ancient art of storytelling. It was started to entertain each other, to comfort each other, to instruct the young in the lesson of living, and to pass on their religious and cultural heritage. With the decline of Greek civilization and when the Roman Empire rose, the tales of the gods, goddesses, heroes, and heroines of the classical world increases. Now comes to the Middle Age. It is also known as the decline of the European civilization age. Much of the knowledge of the classical world was lost during this age, so it is also known as the Dark Ages of literature. In addition to religious tales, non-religious secular stories were also popular at that time, in which the exciting battle scenes, powerful heroes, and wondrous enchantments of romances were popular during that time. Now the history of children's literature comes to the Renaissance world. At that time, the invention of printing press made it possible to make multiple copies of books in a fraction of that time. It was possible to spread information quickly, and this opened the door to mass education because of the invention of the printing press. During the early Renaissance, new books and most of the books specifically for children and textbooks and educational books were developed. In the 18th and early 19th century, by the efforts of John Newbery, an English bookseller, children's literature promoted. A Little Prato Pocket Book 1744 was one of the first published children's book. The main features of that time were the moral development and the rising of the folk tales. The stories developed at that time were based on the moral and the folk-based stories. After that development, the storybooks as Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, and Sleeping Beauty in the Wood became popular in English nurseries. In the middle of the 18th century, by the efforts of French women, numerous fairy stories included as Beauty and the Beast and the Three Wishes. Successor of New Berries, Elizabeth Newberry published the first children's book of the Middle East. After that, Tales of the Arabian Nights, Sindbad the Sailor, Aladdin and his lamp, and so many books were developed in about 1791. Now comes to the Victorian Age, also known as Golden Age. In British children's literature, the categories were classified as adventurous or boys' story, based on fantasy stories, and based on some realistic stories. In the United States, stories set in their own country. It was also categorized as adventurous stories based on boys' stories, domestic or girls' stories, and the third category was the fantasy story, which was the main factor of that age. If we comes to the present time, the literature of the period is focused on what the children like themselves, and the literature is basically child-centered. In today's world, children's literature has proven to be rich and exciting. In fantasy, a number of series have appeared in the past 50 years. In India, by the efforts of various writers and poets, literature became popular. Ishwachandra Vidyasagar translated some stories and wrote some books himself. Rabindranath Tagore wrote plays, stories and poems. Biharilal Puri wrote some books on children's literature in Punjabi language. A well-known name of Gujarati literature as Gijubhai Pathika, who wrote about 200 books in the children's literature in Gujarati and other languages. Nandalal Bose, who was the painter, wrote some book in children's literature in India. Now, what is the importance of children's literature? According to Janet, books help give children a leg up on the ladder of life. Children's literature is important for the strengthening a bond between the child and the adult reader. It is important for the experiences and the pleasure of fantasy world. Important for developing a favorable attitude, stimulating for the cognitive development. Children's literature is important for the development of vocabulary and syntax. Literature is also important for the becoming familiar with the story and the text structure, and for stimulating and expanding the imagination power of the child. Literature is important for stretching attention spans. Literature importance for development of feelings, learning ways to cope up with their feelings and problems, development of interest and hobbies, and for understanding the heritage of own and other cultures, important for learning new knowledge about nature and society, important for the aesthetic development and exploring artistic media used in the illustration. So, the literature plays an important role in the life of every child.